full room right before the holiday. So.
Oh, so that was just a tease? You
didn't have
anything. You didn't have anything to say.
I'm here for your questions.
Okay. Well, tell us what the latest, your latest understanding is of the this alleged deal.
With respect to hostages, so what I will say is that we are very close to an agreement, but we are not there yet. As you have heard us say a number of times over the course of the past few weeks, nothing is final until everything is final. And at this point, everything is not yet final, but we are close. The Israeli cabinet is meeting to discuss this matter right now. We are in close conversation with them, as we are with the government of Qatar, who has been helping facilitate discussions since the early days of the crisis. We are hopeful to have some good news for the hostages and their families. We're hopeful we can start bringing some of them home. But as I said at the outset, we are not quite there yet.
All right. Well, so when you made reference to the Israeli cabinet meeting right now, is that the last thing that needs to be done?
I really don't want to get into the underlying details. Obviously, the Israeli government discussing and coming to some sort of resolution is one part of this. There are others. I don't want to get into the full details. I will say that, of course, the implementation and execution of an agreement, should one be reached, requires the cooperation of Hamas, a terrorist organization. So it's why we're always hesitant to say too much about what will happen before it has happened. But we are close to an agreement and hopeful one can be reached.
Jen. Is your understanding that the first tranche of hostages to be released would include Americans?
I just can't get into any type of details of what an agreement would look like, including who would be released if such an agreement was finalized.
And have you received any updates on their conditions, whereabouts, if they're being held together, if they are all in fact being held by Hamas?
Again, I can't get into too much into the underlying details. It has always been our assessment that Hamas may not have control of all of these hostages, but beyond that, I just don't want to speak to any specific details. Yeah, Barbara. Oh, sorry.
Is it your understanding that if and when a deal is reached, that would then trigger more aid being able to get into Gaza, as the Secretary had suggested would happen?
Let me say a couple things about that. One, it has always been the position of the United States that we do not need a hostage deal. There shouldn't to get more aid in, that more fuel, more food, more water, more medicine should not be contingent on a hostage agreement being reached. We thought that the delivery of humanitarian assistance for the Palestinian people was important in its own right, and that's why the Secretary has been pushing for it. It's why the President has been pushing for it. It's what our Ambassador David Satterfield, our special envoy, I should say, Ambassador David Satterfield, has been working to implement on the ground. That said, it has been clear that for some time that an agreement on hostages would release or would unlock the potential for delivery of more humanitarian assistance. So we're hopeful that that would take place. But again, it has always been our position that the two don't need to be linked, that humanitarian assistance should be delivered as quickly as possible for the benefit of the Palestinian people.
But the Israelis seem to have linked it, it seems.
It does seem that the way I would say it is it does appear that any kind of hostage agreement, should we reach one, would unlock more humanitarian assistance flowing in. Barbara.
Actually, that was similar to my question, but on the understanding that is what you're hoping for, have you made extra preparations? I mean, are you poised to move quickly to get more aid in? Like, what's the activity around that?
We have been working to not just related to any hostage arrangement. We have been working independent of that to facilitate the delivery of more humanitarian assistance in. And so you have seen U.S. aid fly more humanitarian assistance into Egypt to have it pre-positioned so it could go into Gaza. Some of that aid has started to move. We've been working with other international donors to facilitate the delivery of aid to Egypt to go in through Rafah. And then, of course, there's a screening process that has been a bit of an impediment to the fast delivery of aid. And we have been working with the government of Israel, with the government of Egypt on all of these matters to try to increase the flow of humanitarian assistance. You saw a breakthrough last week, an initial breakthrough, when we saw an agreement to deliver fuel in, which of course is important to ensure that water can be desalinated. It's important to ensure that there's electricity for hospitals. It's important to ensure that the implementers, the organizations that actually deliver the humanitarian assistance inside Gaza, once it goes through Rafah into Gaza, that they can deliver it to the people who need it. So we have been pushing all those things independent of any potential hostage arrangement, and will continue to do so.
Just to follow up, so you mentioned the issue about the screening and trying to get more facilities or people in place to do more screening, which would then help more aid. If there is a long humanitarian pause in exchange for hostages, although you're not linking aid to hostages, but whatever, if there is a time period, does that mean you wouldn't necessarily get a lot more aid in if you're still dealing with these issues like screening and so on? Like, how much how much do you think it could boost aid if there was?
I think we're getting into the realm I'm not comfortable. I'll talk a little bit about what we have done and what we're trying to do, but when we start getting too far into what could happen as a potential result of a deal that has not yet been reached, I think I'm going to decline to comment in too much detail.
Just one last question. The Israelis beginning their southern offensive, and you've talked about wanting to make sure there's better arrangements in place for protection of civilians. Have you been asking them to delay their southern offensive until that's ready? I mean, they've already kind of started anyway, but where are things at?
So I won't get into too much detail about the private conversations that happen between our two governments, but we have made clear to them, as we have made clear publicly, that we think they should not commence with further activities in the South until they have taken the proper steps to account for the humanitarian needs there. There are several 100,000 people who have moved from the north to the south. Before any military offensive begins there, we would want to ensure that those people are properly protected. Saeed, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on a couple of things that Barbara raised, but before that, I want to state for the record that the poet, Mus'ab Abu Toha, whom I raised yesterday, he was actually released today by the Israelis, and I like to think that you guys had something to do with that, and he will be on his way to Egypt so he can come back to the United States with his family. On the issue of the deal itself, now we're talking about
the issue of what itself?
The potential deal.
Oh, the deal.
The
Yeah.
potential deal, that could or may not happen. Is it your understanding that there is a split in the Israeli cabinet as to who may agree or disagree, and will that hold the going forward with a deal?
I'm just not going to discuss internal Israeli political matters.
Right, but let's say, if the whole cabinet agrees and the larger cabinet does not agree, or the Supreme Court and so on, then we're back to square one. Are you urging the Israelis to go forward with the deal?
I'm not going to discuss our private conversations with the Israeli government, but we have been attempting to reach an agreement to secure the release of hostages for some time, and I'll leave it at that.
Let me just ask you on something that you always state, that you want the Israelis to abide by the laws of war. You want to minimize civilian casualties among Palestinians and so on. Yesterday or the day before was, Children's World Day or whatever. 5,500 Palestinian children have died thus far. Do you think the Israelis are abiding by the laws of war?
So I will say that it is a tragedy how many people have died in Gaza. It's a tragedy how many children have died, especially. As the Secretary has said, it is our belief that far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed as a result of this conflict. We continue to engage with the government of Israel about steps we believe they should take to minimize civilian casualties. It is an ongoing conversation between our two governments, and we continue to engage with them on every possible measure they can take to ensure that civilians are not in harm's way as they conduct legitimate military operations. And I do want to remind everyone again that the reason why this is so difficult even in most conflicts, is because Hamas embeds itself inside civilian targets. And so Israel faces this difficult situation where there are legitimate military targets, terrorists who launched an attack against the Israeli public and who have said they want to continue launching terrorist attacks against the Israeli public, and in fact continue to launch rockets, even in the past few days, against the Israeli public. And Israel has a right and obligation to take military action to try to bring those terrorists to justice, but their burden is in no way lessened to minimize civilian harm. And so that is what we continue to emphasize to them in all of our conversations with them, including concrete steps about how they can do that.
And on that very point, now the Israelis seem to be obsessed with the Palestinian hospitals. I wonder if you've seen the interview done on CNN with the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who acknowledged that it was actually Israel that built these, basements or tunnels and so on. Have you seen that?
I saw a report of the interview. I haven't seen the full interview, and I don't have any independent assessment about that. I would say, regardless of what particular tunnel he might be speaking to, or if there are Hamas, the issue of Hamas embedding itself under a hospital would be a different matter.
Right. Obviously, I mean, they really showed no proof, but what he was suggesting that these, whatever, caverns or whatever you want to call them underneath the hospital, they actually were there for utilitarian purposes.
So what I will say about that is, number one, we we've assessed, but it's public knowledge at this point, shown over many years, that Hamas has also built its own tunnels, regardless of that. Number two, whatever infrastructure exists at a hospital, under a hospital, no matter who put it there, terrorists should not be using that infrastructure to embed themselves underneath a civilian target, underneath a civilian hospital, underneath a hospital that is supposed to exist for the care of civilians, and making that, using that facility as a human shield. So it is, I think, a separate issue than who might have built whatever room it is the former prime minister was referring to. Humera.
Matt, just to follow up on a couple of things from colleagues' questions. So this might be a little bit down the line, but is there at all an understanding in these hostage negotiations for what comes next after this deal? And I'm asking because there are 240 people who are taken hostage by Hamas. So while Israel, Hamas, Qatar, and you were somehow in these conversations about this number of people, was there any understanding for what happens with the rest of the people?
So I do appreciate the question, but if I'm going to decline to comment on an arrangement that has not yet been finalized, not yet been reached, I certainly don't think I can comment on what might come next after this arrangement. Right. I would just say, to reiterate that, again, we're close to a deal. We don't have one yet. I can't talk about what might be in a potential deal, let alone what might come in its aftermath.
But surely you're talking for everybody.
It has been our goal from the beginning to secure the release of every single hostage. The United States is focused on American citizens, of course, but we're focused on all of the hostages. We want to see all the hostages released. We don't think any of them should be held. That has been the goal of our negotiations from the outset, but I can't get into what any steps might look like.
And just to push you a little bit more on Barbara's question about possible Israeli offensive in the south, Jon Finer also talked about this as well, but what is the very latest in the sense that are you getting a timeline from them on when they are planning to start this? And are you telling them specifically, here are the things, here are the objectives, here are the safe zones you have to create, or whatever you think appropriate to call them, before you start this? And without these, you should not be starting this. Is it that clear cut?
So we are having fairly detailed conversations with them about steps that they could take to protect civilians and steps that they could take to increase humanitarian access, increase humanitarian protections, especially in the south. I don't want to get into the details of those conversations. Obviously, the Israeli government makes its own decisions about its military campaigns. The conversations that we have been having with them are on steps that they can take as they look to the south to increase protections for civilians, especially considering that hundreds of thousands of civilians, after being told to move by the Israeli government, moved from the north to the south. We think it's important that those civilians now have a way to put themselves out of harm's way.
And in terms of the protections for civilians, is it United States government's proposal, and does it include ICRC or UN for the creation of those safe zones? Like, whose proposal is it, and what does it look like?
So we have been in conversation not just with the government of Israel, but with a range of humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, about how exactly civilian protections could be implemented, how they can best be implemented. But I think it's best that while those conversations are ongoing, I keep the details of them confidential.
Do you have like a target in mind? Like we're looking to conclude those conversations and have some sort of a rough plan by the end of the week, soon?
I just wouldn't want to put a timeline on it.
One more.
Yeah.
There seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between U.S. and UN on the opening of Kerem Shalom. I've read the transcript from yesterday. You guys don't seem to be focusing on trying to get that one open. Do you think Rafah has the capacity to process more aid? But UN, Martin Griffiths seems to disagree a little bit, and they are imploring Israel to allow humanitarian aid via Kerem Shalom. Why the discrepancy?
So there may be a little bit of apples and oranges here. I think in terms of addressing your question, we don't think that there is a problem with the ability for Rafah to handle more traffic in terms of the number of trucks that can just physically go through it carrying humanitarian. Rafah is big enough to handle that. It's big enough to allow the delivery of a massive amount of humanitarian assistance. There has been an issue with screening. I think Jen was alluding to it in her question earlier. And we have been in conversation with the government of Israel about additional ways to get additional screening for trucks that would then go in through Rafah. But no, I'm coming. The government of Israel has very real concerns about security at Kerem Shalom. And you can understand why. One side of that border is obviously Gaza, in areas of Gaza that are still controlled by Hamas, that are not controlled by the government of Israel. We continue to have conversations with Israel about the best way to increase the amount of screening so trucks can get screened and then get in through Rafah, but they do have very real concerns about opening Kerem Shalom, and that's why you've seen them not take that step as of yet.
Final thing, because Griffiths is actually giving a percentage saying Kerem Shalom crossing was used to carry more than 60% of the truckloads going into Gaza before the conflict, but I understand and I'm aware of the sort of screening-related backlog. U.S. is not pursuing this actively with the Israelis, is what I'm understanding from you, the opening of that.
The point I'm making is that we think Rafah is sufficient for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. That is a separate question from screening. We want to try to get screening back online and open, but we think Rafah Gate at this point is the appropriate way to get assistance in. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Correspondent Farah Amar, she was colleague as well, and cameraman Rabi' Amari were killed by an Israeli attack in south of Lebanon. It was a direct attack because it was carried by a drone. And drone, you have a camera, you can see who's on the ground. They were under a tree waiting for her turn to go on live on TV. Well, there was a comment from the manager of the Mayadeen channel, who happened to be their boss, that Israeli government decision this month to block access to the channel's website, and this attack targeted them. Last week, almost my colleague Nakhli Adaimi could have killed as well. The missile passed by him, and there was a convoy of different stations, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, all kind of stations, Washington Post in Beirut. They were checking some of the areas, a tour by the UN. So how Israel is obeying the rule of law if it's attacking directly journalists to punish them or silence them? And no offense, but Israel has an extension, a huge history of killing civilians directly.
So again, I'm never in a position from here to speak to any particular strike or any particular military action when the entire facts are not known to me or not known to the U.S. government, including what information the government of Israel had, what might have gone into a decision, whether there was a mistake or not. It's impossible for me to speak to the merits of any individual strike. That has been true not just with respect to this one, but with respect to others. I will say that we are concerned by the reports that civilians, including 2 journalists, were killed in Lebanon. Our thoughts are with the loved ones of those killed and all these Lebanese people. If you were here yesterday, you heard me speak to our belief in the importance that journalists play in conflict zones. Journalists are fundamental to a free society. We stand with the journalists around the world who do critical work that we rely on every day. We rely on the reports of journalists here in the United States government. We know people all around the world do, and they do that in some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable. I will also say that we are concerned over the escalation of violence along the blue line. We have made clear we don't want to see the conflict in Gaza spread to Lebanon. That has been one of our top priorities and one of the top objectives we've tried to achieve since the outset of this conflict. Restoring calm along the blue line is of the utmost importance to us, and it should be a top priority for both Israel and Lebanon.
There was also an attack on a church yesterday. And, I'm not sure if you know the nature of south of Lebanon. Christian villages don't have any existence of Hezbollah. So we can say like Hamas, they were like attacking or throwing missiles next to a hospital or a mosque. In Lebanon, Christian villages don't have any presence of Hezbollah. What was the target inside that church? So who was holding accountability? I know you're putting so much pressure on the Israeli government.
No, I understand, but when you asked me that type of question, it was not an action carried out by the United States government. It's not a question I can answer, and I'm not able to offer an assessment about an individual strike.
You are supplying Israel over $14 billion of military aid.
But when it comes to a specific strike where it's not an action that's taken by the United States government, and I don't have all the available information, it's not something I can offer an assessment on.
Why the post? Last
Go
question.
yeah.
Why the feeling in the Middle East that anything happened with everybody's as a human as any person will condemn any action against humans what happened October 7. Why there's a feeling in the Middle East in every country now that the U.S. whatever happens in Israel it's a big deal, but the life of Palestinians or other people it's no deal.
So
I'm telling you what's the feeling in love, and you can do a survey and you can have the same feeling.
Let me just answer the question. I think the Secretary has been very clear about this exact question, that far too many Palestinians have been killed. He's spoken to this directly. He's spoken to how, as a father, when he sees especially the bodies of deceased children, how it affects him. And I can tell you that's true for everyone inside the United States government. And it is precisely why we do engage with the Israeli government to impress upon them the need to take all possible steps to minimize civilian harm. So I hear this sometimes, and I can tell you these are conversations that we have at the highest levels of our government, sometimes very intense conversations about steps that we believe Israel should take, as well as the steps that we believe they should take to keep civilians out of harm's way, to help civilians move to places where they'll be safe from harm so they won't be injured from this ongoing military conflict, as well as the steps that we think are important that we have pushed for and in many cases secured to get humanitarian assistance in to the Palestinian people. Go ahead.
I want to go back to Gaza and the ongoing, the reports of ongoing and circulation of the Indonesian hospital and Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, and there's also reports of some killed and injured during some Israeli military attack on the hospital. What is the reason of attacking this hospital in your perspective?
So I would say I'm not able to assess the merits, the individual facts or circumstances surrounding any individual strike. I think all of you that have covered wars in the past know about conflicting information that emerges and accounts that change over time. It's difficult for anyone to make an assessment about what happened and the reason for it happened, and certainly we don't have all the facts, or I don't have all the facts here at this podium to speak to them. I will say, as a principle, we do not want to see hospitals struck from the air. We want to see hospitals protected. Hospitals provide critical services to the civilian population in Gaza, and we want to see the government of Israel take steps to minimize harm to civilians, and of course that includes at hospitals where civilians are seeking much-needed medical care.
But I'm not talking about the merit from the Israeli point of view. I mean, for that Al-Shifa, for example, you had an assessment that Al-Shifa is used by Hamas either as a headquarter or a command center. Do you have any assessment that Hamas is using the Indonesian hospital as a command center?
I'm not going to speak to intelligence assessments aside from the very limited information that we have already downgraded and made public. We do see, unfortunately, that Hamas uses not just hospitals but mosques and schools and other pieces of civilian infrastructure as places where they can embed their fighters, as places where they can use to launch attacks, and places where they can use civilians as human shields. So, as I said a minute ago in answer to another question, it puts the Israeli government in a very difficult position where they are trying to defeat legitimate military or try to accomplish legitimate military objectives, but sometimes when the terrorists they are trying to go after have hidden themselves in hospitals and schools and mosques. So it is a difficult problem, but it doesn't lessen their responsibility, which is why we continue to engage in these conversations with them about taking every possible step they can to minimize civilian harm. I will say with respect to Al-Shifa, we were very clear. We did not want to see Al-Shifa struck from the air. We did not want to see fighting going on inside the hospital. We wanted to see civilians protected. And I think when Israel did launch their military operation at Al-Shifa, you saw them do it, in a much more careful way, where they went into the hospital in a way where they were trying to protect patients and where they were trying to evacuate patients. Before they went in, they offered to help facilitate or to allow third-party relief organizations to facilitate the evacuation of that hospital. Hamas said no. Hamas wouldn't allow it. So there's always more that Israel can do to take steps to minimize civilian harm, and we will continue to encourage them to do that. But again, as long as Hamas continues to embed itself inside the civilian population, we are going to see this difficult challenge over and over again. Yeah, Michelle.
Will the Secretary receive the Arab ministerial delegation that visited China, and how do you view their visit to China first?
I don't have any scheduling announcements to make, but certainly a number of the ministers who made that trip to China are people who he's met with repeatedly in the past few weeks, and people he's had conversations with by phone repeatedly. So we will continue to engage with a number of those individuals, whether it be here, whether it be in the region. I think you can anticipate that the Secretary is not done traveling to the region. And of course, I will mention that we met with the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, both of whom were part of this delegation in New York last month. So we will continue to meet with them, whether it's here or there. I don't have an announcement to make at this time.
The conference has asked all the countries who are providing Israel with arms to stop providing them with ammunitions and arms. Is the U.S. ready to do so? No,
that is not a step we're ready to take. In fact, we have a supplemental request pending before Congress that we hope Congress will act on expeditiously, which provides additional assistance to Israel as well as additional assistance to Ukraine.
And finally, do you have any update on the talks and the discussions that you are doing with partners and allies regarding the ship that the Houthis seized?
No, I do not. It continues to be an ongoing matter of diplomatic discussion. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. A couple of but before that, potential deal. I understand you don't want to get into details about the potential deal.
Oh, yeah.
How confident are you that there will be well-established international mechanism to ensure that all the sides are holding promises?
I'm not going to talk at all about any of the details of a potential deal, which that obviously would be when one has not yet been reached.
What is your level of concern that the potential deal might be jeopardized by other actors like Iran?
Again, let's. I know, but like any questions about a potential deal, maybe let's wait until we actually have a deal, and then we can talk about it. But when it's still a potential deal, I think I'll decline to comment.
The White House said that it's concerned that Wagner is potentially preparing to send military equipment to Hezbollah or Iran. First of all, what do you know, and what can you do to prevent this from happening? And also, in terms of deal, how much do you think this might jeopardize?
So it is a concern that we have. The White House spoke to this earlier today. I don't have any kind of detail to add to that. But to the question, third time you've tried to ask me, I'm just not going to comment at all on a potential deal and what implication anything might have or might not have on it.
As for Wagner itself, as you know, this is international. The U.S. recognizes it as an international criminal organization. Where do you draw the line, red line, in terms of switching from international criminal organization to recognizing it as an international terrorist organization?
So this is a conversation that you and I have had many times. I don't have a different answer for you than I've had the previous new angle. It's the same question. I don't have the different answer than the previous 7 or 8 times I've answered it, which is we have taken a number of steps to hold Wagner accountable, including the designated you mentioned, including multiple sanctions for its activities in Ukraine, its activities in Africa, and we will continue to do so.
Please come back to Ukraine as a translator.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the exchange in this room yesterday about the future of Gaza. You said there may need to be some transition period in Gaza. Can you clarify what do you mean by a transition period, and who will govern Gaza during this transition period?
Again, we're getting this is a little cart before the horse, as some of the questions about hostages have been. What I meant with respect to a transition period is something the Secretary has spoken to. First, let me back up and say that we have outlined some clear principles that we believe ought to apply to the future to the future status of Gaza when this conflict is over. Been through those principles: no reoccupation of Gaza, no control of Gaza by Hamas, no diminution in the territorial size of Gaza, no siege of Gaza. That said, Israel is conducting a military operation. At some point, that military operation will end. There will have to be a transition period before the next status emerges. Before we've talked about what we want to see as the Palestinian Authority ultimately governing both Gaza and the West Bank. There has to be some security force in place for a transition period. You can't just see the Israeli government complete its security operations and then walk out and leave Gaza in a vacuum, a security and political vacuum immediately. So there will have to be some transition period. What that transition period looks like, I think it's too early to say. We're engaged in those conversations with allies and partners right now, and we'll continue to look for the best solution possible, with one of our first principles being that the Palestinian people themselves need to be front and center in deciding the future governance of Gaza and the West Bank. But I think as we are in the ongoing military campaign in Gaza, it's a little too early to talk about what those details might look like.
So you stated the U.S. position, but it seems that the U.S. and Israel have different visions for a post-war Gaza. Secretary Blinken said Gaza should be unified with the West Bank under the PA, but Netanyahu made it clear during a CNN interview that he would not be handing over Gaza's control to the PA. There are also other issues that it seems that you don't agree on. So how will you address this gap between you and the Netanyahu government?
That is what diplomacy is for. We have laid out our principles, and you will see us engage with the government of Israel, as well as other governments in the region, to advance our principles, as well as engage with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people directly to talk about what the future of Gaza looks like at the end of this conflict.
Thank you, Mark. Going back to the deal, you said that you're close to that deal. How close you are, and then do you expect to be announced?
I don't even know how to answer that question. I think I said we're very close. I don't. We're getting a little into the. Go ahead.
Yeah, Qatari government will announce it today. Do you expect it?
I'm not going to speculate at all about when an announcement may come.
What's your priority when we are talking about bringing and releasing the hostages? Is that elderly or the American people?
Again, I don't want to talk to the underlying details. We ultimately, our goal has been to see the release of all hostages. We think there's no reason that Hamas ought to be holding hostages at all. It's a reminder, I stand up here and take all these questions about what the government of Israel has done. Hamas continues to hold hostages, elderly people, children, sick people. They all ought to be released immediately. Now, what the arrangement might look like, I'm not going to speak to any underlying details.
Put some American
I'm just not going to. I'm going to draw the line and not decline to comment on any further details. Sorry. I do appreciate all the questions. There's been some creative attempts, but I'm going to decline. Yeah, go ahead.
Change of subject?
Sure.
U.S. Ambassador in Pakistan, Donald Bloom, announced the aid package of $4 million for Pakistani security forces to bolster Pakistan's counterterrorism capabilities. But a group of U.S. lawmakers, in a letter to Secretary Blinken, asked Biden administration to suspend all military assistance to Pakistan for human rights violations and for the political crisis. So would you provide any details about that aid package and how will you respond to that letter of U.S. lawmakers?
So I wouldn't want to preview how we would respond to the letter here. We will obviously respond directly to those members of Congress. With respect to the announcement that the ambassador made, we'll be pursuing 4 new initiatives to support the Balochistan police in their efforts to protect and serve their local communities. We're going to provide $4 million in assistance to expand the anti-terrorist force training facility, $2 million to repair or replace 10 flood-damaged police stations, $2 million to construct 10 new police stations that incorporate the same model to improve service to women, girls, and all Pakistanis, and then an additional $250,000 in equipment to protect law enforcement officers in the course of conducting their work. These initiatives build on more than 40 years of partnership between the U.S. mission in Pakistan and the Pakistani government on civilian security and rule of law. And from our standpoint, the partnership improves justice institutions and provides law enforcement agencies with the tools they need to protect Pakistan's citizens.
The Pakistani media is reporting that U.S. Ambassador Donald Bloom held a meeting with former Prime Minister Imran Khan in Adiala prison and discussed the political situation. Would you deny or confirm that meeting?
I would refer you to the embassy to contact to comment on any meetings the ambassador has had. But as we have said a number of times, we do not take a position on candidates for political office in Pakistan or any other country.
One last question, sir. Pakistan is deporting millions of Afghan refugees, but on the request of U.S. government, Pakistan says that it would not deport 25,000 Afghan refugees who are waiting for their American visas. So how would you see this decision of the Pakistani government?
So we are in close and constant communication with the government of Pakistan on the safety of individuals in the U.S. pipeline. It is our desire to work in good faith with the government of Pakistan to address any concerns that it may have. Our key concern is the safety of the vulnerable and at-risk individuals. We believe it is in both our countries' interests to ensure the safe and efficient resettlement of refugees and asylum seekers, and we join all of our partners in urging all countries, including Pakistan, to uphold their respective obligations in the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, and strongly encourage all of Afghanistan's neighbors to allow entry for Afghans seeking international protection and coordinate with international humanitarian organizations to provide humanitarian assistance.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you give us a sense of numbers on how many Americans, Afghans we're talking about that would be in this pipeline?
I don't have a number at my disposal right now. I'd be happy to follow up and see if we can get it for you. I just don't have it at my fingertips.
Thank
Go
you
ahead.
so much. I'll stay in subcontinent. Just to make sure, do you think that the choice of violence by the Nationalist Party in Bangladesh is contributing to the undermining the democratic process in Bangladesh?
So we want to see a free and peaceful election in Bangladesh. We want to see the elections carried out peacefully. That has been our policy, as I've made clear a number of times from here.
Thank you for that. Will you condemn, I repeat, will you condemn the political violence orchestrated by the BNP to the context of human rights that you care about?
I think I answered that with my previous answer. Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a question on Russia and one on the U.S. There is a media report that President Biden will not be attending tomorrow's virtual G20 summit. Who will be representing the U.S. tomorrow?
So I will let the White House speak to the president's schedule. I don't have any update on that.
Okay. And I have one more question on CTBT. Mm-hmm. So as you know, Russia has withdrew its ratification of the treaty. And following that, Secretary Blinken said that the U.S. remains committed to achieving the entry into force of the treaty. Can you please clarify, has the State Department done anything over the past 2 years to advance this goal and to work with the Senate to ratify it?
Let me take that one back and get you an answer. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
With Nicaragua pulling out of the OAS, the Organization of American States, I saw your tweet. I saw the State Department's reaction to that, the letter. But how much more difficult is it now to hold the Ortega regime responsible for human rights abuses now that they're out of the OAS?
We believe, so I will say that we will continue to call for the release of political prisoners in Nicaragua. We will continue to work with our allies and partners in the region. We do see them trying to avoid trying to avoid accountability measures, including by departing the OAS, and it's something we will continue to work with on our allies and partners with.
One more question, if I may, a separate topic. I should have said separate topic earlier. Sorry.
There's no rule on how you preface a question. So,
all right. I know we're all around the world here.
Yeah.
So, this is sort of specific here. So, bear with me here. Foreign-born religious workers in the U.S. here on temporary work visas. They're very worried that they're going to be sent back to their countries because of a change in how green cards are processed. They basically have to wait in a longer line to get their green card, but they're worried in the meantime their temporary work visa will expire, and they'll be sent back to their country of origin. Bottom line is they're worried their flocks are going to be left behind, their congregations are going to be left behind. Does the State Department share those concerns with those religious workers? Are you aware of that?
You are right. That is a very specific question. Let me take it back and get you an answer. Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. Your counterpart at the NSC, John Finer, was also very careful, but he did say that the State Department might play a role in processing any released American hostages that might want to come home, suggesting it might look like the way non-hostages coming out of Gaza are processed by consular officers. Can you say anything more?
All I would say is that with respect to any released hostage, it would be the same as with respect to any American in the world who needs assistance. We would provide them whatever consular assistance we can, and that obviously is true for any released hostages.
And on the Americans in Gaza, do you have an updated number of how many are seeking to leave the enclave?
It is still, we have gotten around 800 American citizens, legal permanent residents, and their family members out. I don't have any update in terms of the numbers who are seeking to leave from the number I gave yesterday, which was around 1,200. But again, that's not the number of American citizens. That's American citizens and family members and others. Alex, go ahead.
Back to Ukraine, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Today marks 10 years since Ukraine's revolution of dignity. Just want to give you a chance to speak to that. The Kremlin keeps calling it a quote-unquote foreign-sponsored coup. And separately, Russian foreign ministry officials also today were quoted as saying that the coexistence with Ukrainian current quote-unquote regime is not possible. What is your understanding?
Say that last part again.
The coexistence with Ukrainian regime is not possible, they say. What is your understanding of what they are saying here, and what is your reaction?
So I think my reaction would be is that you continue to see the Russian government make outrageous and unacceptable statements about Ukraine. And so it just reinforces our conviction to continue to supply Ukraine with the assistance that it needs to defend itself, to repel Russian aggression from its borders. We've seen Russia make, and that applies to the first part of your question as well, the amount of Russian propaganda that we hear about Ukraine didn't just start this year or last year. It has been going on for a number of years. And it reaffirms, as I said, our commitment, and I think heightens the need for Congress to take action to pass the supplemental request that we've sent up to Ukraine. The Secretary just today had a call with his G7 counterparts to talk about additional steps that we are taking through the United States, and we are taking in concert with our allies and partners and in cooperation with the government of Ukraine to try to harden Ukraine's infrastructure in advance of the winter. Last winter, we saw Russia striking energy sites, trying to take them down in Ukraine, and so we are working with Ukraine to try to harden its infrastructure in advance of this winter.
As you can offer in particular about Maidan's anniversary.
Just what I already said. Go ahead. Yeah, Alex, that's a few. Go ahead, and then we're gonna wrap here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt.
Go ahead, and we're gonna have to wrap up.
This morning's North Korea missile launch. I understand NSC put out a statement saying you guys are still making assessments, but according to Yonhap, North Korea is claiming that it successfully put a spy satellite in orbit. So are you able to confirm whether or not the launch was successful? And if so, how does this change the security situation in the region and for the U.S.?
So I cannot confirm that assessment. It is still something that's ongoing inside the United States government. I can say that we condemn the DPRK's unlawful launch of a military reconnaissance satellite on today. This launch utilized ballistic missile technology, which includes space launch vehicles. It violates multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions, and we will continue to work with the international community to send a strong signal to the DPRK that its actions will only intensify its isolation as it undermines stability and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula.
Can you say how concerning it would be if North Korea had a spy satellite?
I'm just not going to speak to that before we've made a formal assessment. With that, we'll wrap for today. I hope everyone has a safe and restful and peaceful Thanksgiving. Thank you all.